Now.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It's 6:06. You're listening to O'Connor and Company here on WMAL. It's America's morning show. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to make it worth your while. We're going to get you informed, updated, maybe even activated to get through your day with all the facts you need to navigate the news cycle, and hopefully we'll put a smile on your face as well. At 6:35, Sarah Parshall Perry from Heritage will give us the details of a Supreme Court decision to allow Idaho to keep a ban on gender-affirming care for transgender youth. And by gender-affirming care, I, of course, mean something that neither affirms someone's gender or is in any way care for a child. It's child mutilation.
That's right.
And it's good that Idaho is able to continue to ban it. This will help other states as well. 7:05, Paul Kamenar, a lead counsel at National Legal and Policy Center about Trump's day in court yesterday. 8:05, Lee Zeldin, former congressman of New York. And at 8:35, Adam Credo, Washington Free Beacon. I'm Larry O'Connor. That there is Julie Gunlock. Good morning, Julie.
Good morning.
Your voice sounds so much better. Do you think that you're beating the bug?
I think so.
Oh,
yeah.
Good, because I've got it now. Thanks.
It's not my fault.
I'd rather blame Meredith. She is probably my patient X, as it were.
Hope she's feeling better.
It's all right. Everybody's got this thing.
Yeah.
All right. So here's what it sounded like in Chicago on Saturday as protesters were being taught how to say death to Israel and death to America in Farsi, the language of Iran.
So I'm going to teach you a chant in Persian that you can use if you ever encounter those Zionist freaks, whether they be Iranian or whatever, all right? Now, I don't drink margaritas, but we all know what a margarita is. We all know what a bar is. So you're going to say, Marg Bar. Marg Bar. Marg Bar Israel. Marg Bar Israel. Marg Bar Israel. Marg Bar Israel.
All right, they go on and on. I don't want to keep saying it because what they're saying is death to Israel. And then they eventually do that. By the way, my favorite part of this video clip that has gone viral around the internet is that he's teaching them this chant, and these are all white people with masks on, by the way. Thank you very much, because they all have the same dementia at this point. They're all screaming Marg Bar Israel, which is death to Israel. And then when they're done, the guy starts to walk away, and one of them says, hey, what does that mean? Because they didn't even they were robustly screaming it. They were chanting it. They didn't know what they were saying.
Yep.
But it didn't matter. They're such sheeple that they'll go ahead and do whatever they want. Fast forward to yesterday in Chicago, probably those very same people. Yeah, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. They're marching and they're blocking traffic at O'Hare Airport. People had to get out of their little, Avis buses and walk to the airport to catch their planes.
And don't forget, at every airport in the United States, you'll hear this thing over some announcer. It's like an automated thing that says, like, if you see something, if you hear something, say something.
Yeah.
Like, the government says that all the time, right?
Right.
In
any suspicious behavior or activity,
report the suspicious behavior, right?
Yeah.
We're supposed to be, as citizens, sort of citizens that are concerned about our country and that report this kind of behavior. It is right in front of our faces.
Yeah.
And the Democrats are encouraging this.
We've got people supporting terrorists right here at the airport. You might want to look into it. You might want to do something about it.
Right.
In New York City, outside the stock exchange. But they do like their drums. Julio Rosas, of course, grabbed that video, Man on the Street, and he saw one of the people not waving the Palestinian flag. He was waving the Hezbollah flag.
How is that person not arrested?
Actual flag of Hezbollah in San Francisco, Golden Gate Bridge.
For the last 6 months, we have witnessed.
And I know everybody says, well, gosh, all the people who are on the street there, they're not going to be persuaded by this. They're just going to be angry. This is not about the people on the street trying to drive somewhere. This is about people sitting at a bar at happy hour, and they see on television a big protest. and they're drinking their cocktail and trying to pick up some chick at the bar, and they see the banner and they're like, "Oh, I don't know what it is, man, but I'm down with the cause."
Yeah,
this
exactly.
is about persuading people based on television images.
It's not even persuading. I mean, you saw that. You mentioned it. There's a bunch of people sitting in the room. They're screaming that chant, and and then at the end they go, "Oh, what does that mean?" Yeah. This is just people willing to get. They don't know what they're doing. They don't care.
They don't care. They just know that if it's a march, I'm for it. So Harris Faulkner, by the way, yesterday covering the protesting.
Blocked part of the Golden Gate Bridge on the Oakland side, Oakland, California. This is a live look. Look at that. Traffic has come to a halt as police officers in riot gear are responding. Protesters waving flags, and they have painted the bridge in some support of Palestinians, anti-Israel.
Unbelievable. Now, if you'll remember last year when there were a lot of these protests going on, Ron DeSantis mobilized his state legislature, and they passed a law that said this will not be tolerated. And there is, just as there's videos of everything I showed you just now, Chicago, New York, San Francisco, there are videos in Florida where police go in, take the protesters in the street, and drag them forcibly out of the street and throw them into a car and take them to jail, which should be the only response from law enforcement. These are not their streets. These are our streets. And I cannot stand when I hear in Washington, D.C., people saying, well, we had some First Amendment activity disrupting things. First Amendment activity is not defined this way. That is not First Amendment activity. They are violating free speech statutes the moment they disrupt other people's lives in such a dangerous way. These are public thoroughfares, and it shouldn't be tolerated, let alone encouraged by the government here in D.C.
Yeah, we saw the video of a young woman getting up at a city council hearing, I believe in L.A., and threatening to murder.
Sacramento.
Sacramento, and threatening to murder all of those city council members. And she was arrested, and the next day, and she's charged with something like 20 felonies. And they showed her in the courtroom the next day crying, right? And everybody was kind of making fun of her. Mm-hmm. But to me, this is a wonderful moment of a really stupid activist who probably doesn't really know what she's talking about, getting up there. There's never been any consequences. These people say monstrous things, and there's never been any consequences. And Sacramento was fine, like, we've had enough. Mm-hmm. And they arrested her. More of that has to happen.
Well,
we have to have.
You're right. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I thought you were cadencing. I was coming to the end of it. But you're right, of course. But understand something. The only reason that happened in Sacramento, Julie, is because
it wasn't leftists.
It was the target of the ire and the threats were elected officials. Don't you know who we are? You can't do that. You can't.
Well,
I would argue that disrupting the Golden Gate Bridge and blocking traffic to O'Hare Airport and blocking traffic in front of the Stock Exchange is frankly more dangerous than one lone person making an idle threat at a city council meeting.
I totally agree. But I will also say that city council, the chairman of that city council, was a Republican who's like, we're not having this, right? So I agree with you that this was an elected official saying, well, you can block traffic. I get what you're saying, but I think in this case, this was a Republican politician saying, no, we're not standing for that. And that is a good symbol to these activists that, I mean, something like 20 felonies that she's facing. There should be costs to this kind of behavior.
There should be. Well, Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas suggested that. You're gonna hear what he said and what he tweeted out, and we'll have a discussion about what the costs might be, what he suggests people do, since our law enforcement are not empowered to actually enforce the law. Well, when the law enforcement doesn't enforce the law, then people take the law into their own hands because we inherently know what is right and wrong. And so what do we do about it if we see that the cops aren't doing anything about it? We'll broach that topic next. First, though, it's 6:50.
WMAL. Making sense of the news. Live from the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios.
Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
News is brought to you by New Look Home Design.
On the next Vince Colonnese show, the Supreme Court takes up a big January 6th case with huge implications for so many Americans, including President Trump. Join us 3 o'clock here on WMAL.
I agree with you that you have to get to these criminals early. if something like this happened in Arkansas on a bridge there, let's just say I think there'd be a lot of very wet criminals that have been tossed overboard, not by law enforcement, but by the people whose road they're blocking. If they glued their hands to a car or the pavement, well, probably pretty painful to have their skin ripped off. But I think that's the way we'd handle it in Arkansas. And I would encourage most people anywhere that get stuck behind criminals like this who are trying to block traffic to take matters in their own hands. There's only usually a few of them, and there's a lot of people being inconvenienced. It's time to put an end to this nonsense.
So I do like the idea. Basically, in Arkansas, we'd be throwing those people over the bridge.
Right.
Throwing right into the San Francisco Bay, which is a very popular place for people to kill themselves. So maybe that might not be the best solution. However, my heart is with Senator Cotton. Here, my only follow-up question is, well, Senator Cotton, I appreciate that. What would the Arkansas court system say about the person who takes the law into their own hands? Because that's the thing. We, the people, need to know that we're not going to be the ones who are now treated like criminals. Because
that's right.
The problem with law enforcement not enforcing the law and not treating criminals like criminals is that they then end up treating the innocent, righteous, law-abiding American citizens, those who are actually trying to enforce the law and enforce basic principles of right and wrong that we inherently know in our heart, they're treating us like criminals.
Yeah.
And so now what will happen? Because we need that extra part of the equation for our society to work. And I need Senator Cotton to be able to guarantee that that's what will happen if people take this into their own hands. Here in D.C., which is not Arkansas, I doubt that will be the case.
Yeah, I agree. And I do worry about people taking that advice in areas where they wouldn't be treated fairly. But this is part of the social contract. There's a functioning judicial system and law enforcement system, and that reduces the incidence of vigilantism, which we're going to get. If people can't get to work and go about their daily lives, they are going to handle things on their own. It's only a matter of time.
Can someone please explain something to me, though? And this is what's driving me nuts. After the October 7th terror attacks, you saw all these protests on behalf of Palestinians, on behalf of the perpetrators of the attack.
Yeah.
Right? In other words, you're like, we just slaughtered 1,000 people. Meet our demands. We're going to take to the streets and make sure that the people who just slaughtered 1,000 people are heard.
Yeah.
And that their cause is advanced. Iran, over the weekend, just initiated a war against Israel. And suddenly people take to the streets against Israel. What is it they're hoping to achieve here? They're on the side of the aggressors. They're on the side of the murderers and the people waging war.
And also, this is the Islamic Republic. This is not the Iranian people who have made it very clear in multiple protests and in death of their own people at these protests and in thousands thrown in these horrific jails in Iran. The people of Iran do largely, and of course there's some radical people out there, but largely the people of Iran want to live peacefully alongside Israel.
Right.
These are religious zealots and terrorists that run Iran.
Yeah, and I would tell the people
That's
who are marching in the streets on behalf of Hamas and Tehran that in Tehran, across the country of Iran, people march, women march, so that they protest getting murdered because a lock of hair is seen under their scarf.
What are you defending?
By the religious fanatic police of that nation. One upside to the protests in Chicago, though, we always like to leave you with some good news, some sunny side. It's like, oh, come on, give us the positive spin. Here's the positive spin. Dick Durbin missed his flight.
Thank you for that, Larry.
Right?
I was feeling pretty bad right then. That's perfect.
Dick Durbin
God.
had to take a later flight yesterday because of the protests. And so Dick Durbin, he's... now, I want you to know, coming up at 8:05, Lee Zeldin, former New York congressman, is going to join us. I want to ask him about these protests and what should be done and what can be done about them. And also at 8:35, Adam Credo is going to join us, talk about how the Biden administration has been relinquishing various sanctions against Iran that some could easily point to as basically the money that was used for these attacks, these recent attacks. But honestly, I mean, we're going to cover all of that. I am still most troubled by the by the insidious nature of the degradation of our culture and our everyday way of life, because there's so much money being poured into these groups that are disrupting our everyday existence with these outrageous protests on behalf of foreign terrorist organizations, Julie. It's got to be stopped. This is not free speech. This is not First Amendment. This is an assault on our society.
You know, you talk about how it affects our way of life. You know, I just want to read a quick thing. Maud Marone, who's she's sort of a parent advocate up in New York City, she wrote that yesterday my eldest son's soccer team could not play on one of their scheduled games because migrants refused to leave the field the league had permits for, even after the cops came and told them they needed to leave. Finally, the ref said it's too late to start. So again, she goes on and says that her son couldn't play. She said it's not the worst issue or problem, but it's ugly and so diminishing to the quality of life.
It is.
That
Remember
counts.
when Barack Obama ran for president and his resume was he was a community organizer? I remember Rudy Giuliani sort of mocking. He said, what the hell is a community organizer? Right. This is community organizing.
Yes.
This is Obama politics writ large. This is what he does, and this is not what we're subjected to on a regular basis. Coming up, we're going to speak with Sarah Parshall Perry from Heritage Foundation about the Supreme Court decision on that Idaho gender issue. Next.
WMAL-FM, Woodbridge, Washington, a Cumulus media station.
Making now
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It's 6:36 now on this busy Tuesday morning in your nation's capital. Thanks for joining us. Quickly, I want to run down who we're going to talk to in the future. It's 7:05, Paul Kamenar with National Legal and Policy Center about Trump's day in court yesterday. 8:05, Lee Zeldin, former congressman of New York. And 8:35, Adam Credo, Washington Free Beacon. I'm Larry O'Connor with Julie Gunlock.
Good morning.
Good morning, Julie. We love it when we have good news, and we got good news yesterday as the Supreme Court is now allowing Idaho to enforce a ban on so-called gender-affirming care for minors. Now, let's just be clear here. Gender-affirming care, this is Orwellian doublespeak, because gender-affirming care is actually a chemical and medical procedure that prohibits a child from actually affirming the gender they were born with. It actually chemically or surgically alters their perfectly healthy physical body to accommodate what can only be described as a mental issue, what used to be referred to as gender dysphoria, but which has now become a social contagion that has its own level of psychosis that needs to be addressed. But this is a great thing that the Supreme Court chose not to intervene here, allowing Idaho to do this and to ban these procedures. What will it mean for the rest of the country now? Let's bring in Sarah Parshall Perry, Senior Legal Fellow at the Edwin Meese III Center for Legal and Judicial Studies at the Mighty Heritage Foundation. Ms. Perry, thanks for waking up for us. Good morning.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Did I properly frame this? Because a lot of times people call things a ban or all these, but that's what Idaho is doing here. Idaho is basically saying no more of this for children, even with parents' consent, right?
Yeah, the Vulnerable Child Compassion Act was supposed to go into effect January 1st of 2024, but before it could, two minors, with their parents' help, sued the state of Idaho for enacting the law, saying that without access to the hormones and puberty blockers that they wanted, they would suffer irreparable mental health damage. Well, the district court order, instead of just enjoining the act's application toward these two minors, actually went much further and enjoined the actual act for everyone in the state of Idaho. That was appealed to the Ninth Circuit. In the Ninth Circuit, while that was going on, Alliance Defending Freedom with Raul Labrador's office appealed to the Supreme Court in what's called an interlocutory appeal, right? A request for interim relief, saying we don't dispute the lower court's injunction as to these two individuals, but you can't enjoin the application of the entirety of the law for everybody. That's way more relief than was ever requested or brought up by any of the parties. The district court judge got way over his skis, and in fact, in the order, the concurrence by Gorsuch said that the district court's opinion would have run for, quote, the life of the lawsuit. Well, you know how protracted these lawsuits are. This could be years in litigation. So what he said was, this is way too extreme a request for relief. We are upholding the injunction as to just these two minor individuals, but we are pulling off the injunction for everybody else and allowing the rest of it to go into effect.
And so what happens now in terms of other states? Because I think Florida has a similar law, and there's some other states that were looking at laws like this, I think. Does this now have an effect on all of those states as well, since this is the Supreme Court determining this?
Yeah, so because this is an emergency request for relief and they didn't consider the merits, they won't have any direct impact. But I will tell you some things that are a hopeful sign. We've got 3 cases right now pending on a petition for cert at the Supreme Court, specifically on the Tennessee gender, quote, medicine bans for minors, and one coming out of Kentucky on their gender medicine bans. So 3 right now are currently pending on the merits, whether or not those laws themselves are constitutional. Something else I took from Gorsuch's opinion, which I think is a hopeful sign, he said no statute has been able to prove and no party has demonstrated that this law is unconstitutional. Well, we know it's not unconstitutional. And in fact, I've written some paperwork with a colleague of mine that it's very much a constitutional enforcement of the state's police authority. So there were a couple of minor comments that made me think, listen, they know and actually wrote this. Idaho's going to succeed, very likely, on the merits of whether or not this law is constitutional. Because of that, we're lifting the injunction. So they've had to already take a bird's eye view of whether or not this particular statute is constitutional. That, to me, is a very hopeful sign, based on currently the 3 that are pending at the Supreme Court, that they might encourage those 3 from a constitutional perspective as well.
Sarah, I'm really interested in your opinion on how the winds might be shifting. We had a new huge study coming out of England, the Cass Review, which shows that there's no evidence that this sort of, I hate the phrase, but gender affirming care does anything to help children. So that is a major thing sort of on the science side. Couple this with what we're seeing from the Supreme Court. Are we going to see a change? Are we going to see more laws like this from states to protect these kids? Are we going to see sort of a sort of cultural change? I feel that. Do you feel that? And sort of how is the law going to view this in the future after these cases?
Yeah, that's a great question, Julie. Now we've had 3 very significant studies come out. The Cass report was an absolute bombshell. And remember, she was actually approached by the National Health Service herself to take a 5-year view of 9,000 patients. This is a former head of the Royal College of Pediatrics. She's not a hack. This was a very well-researched study, so she knows what she's talking about. But the Dutch study just came out, 2,700 individuals followed for 15 years. Only 4% of them, by the age of 25, still express gender dysphoria. Couple that with the American College of Pediatricians, who studied 60 studies saying gender, quote, affirming care not only doesn't help mental health and gender dysphoria, it actually exacerbates underlying mental health considerations. So we know Europe is making great strides. Unfortunately, I think because of who we've got in power at the White House and because of what the issues are upon which his administration has hung its hat, I think it's going to be a fight to the finish. We've got 24 states that have already enacted these bans. They are going to continue to enact them. We've got a truncated legislative session this year because of the election. But I am really hopeful that now the Cass report could be the linchpin to finally bring down the entirety of this gender medicine industry, which, of course, is $3+ billion a year.
Yeah, Sarah, I love my libertarian friends, and I think that their ideals are important for us to discuss important issues with regard to the role of the government in our lives and our freedoms and our liberties. And I hear some of my libertarian friends say, listen, regardless of how I feel about this care, I don't think the government should be getting in the way of an individual, how they're raising their child, and how they're trying to seek medical care if they truly think that this is an important type of care that their child needs. What's the appropriate conservative response to that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Larry. I would say that for exactly the same reason we have child welfare laws, and we prevent parents from being able to starve their children or beat their children, we are similarly looking at laws like this to protect a very vulnerable segment of the population, even when parents don't know best. In fact, the states have, in Latin, we call it parens patriae, right? So it has an interest in being sort of the parent of all families within the state to protect their interests, because when the data is coming out now in droves, we recognize a mental health crisis in this country. 60% of these minor children have comorbid, misdiagnosed mental health illnesses. The state's got a right and an opportunity to step in to protect them.
They would say that same mentality and political philosophy could be used to remove a child from a parent's home if the parent has guns in the home. That this is, if the left were to do that.
That's exactly it. And now we're seeing, and we've seen it in Michigan, Washington State, Oregon, California, these children are now being removed from custodial parents, from biological parents, if the parents are not expressing an affirmation
on
of
the
their
other
gender
end of the
dysphoria.
Spectrum. Yeah. All right, we got to leave it there. It's an important debate, and I'm glad we're having it. I'm glad the Supreme Court didn't get in the way of it, just like they did 50 years ago with abortion. I'm just saying, why are we debating abortion right now? Because the natural debate that our country was having in 1972 got preempted and stifled.
Right.
And this debate needs to happen now without the courts intervening. Let the people discuss this and debate this properly. Sarah Parshall Perry, Heritage, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
No, we were all worried about what Nikki Haley's next step might be for her career, Julie. It looks as though she will not be Donald Trump's running mate. It looks as though she is not in line for a cabinet secretary position in the Trump administration. Maybe in the Biden administration, we shall see. But one thing we know, she is definitely now announcing that she will be joining a think tank. I think we talked about this as her campaign was dwindling down. Which think tank will it be?
Right.
It wasn't going to be Cato. It wasn't going to be Heritage. AFI was an option. What's the one Liz Cheney? AEI. Oh, I said AEI. Is that the one Liz Cheney ended up at, AEI?
I think she's there. Yeah, I think so.
American Enterprise Institute. Yeah. Well, it ended up Hudson Institute signed her up.
All right.
She's going to be writing white papers there, and
I think Hudson does a lot on foreign policy, so it fits.
What's her foreign policy? If it weren't for Donald Trump giving her the gig at the UN, she'd have no foreign policy, and now suddenly she's a foreign policy expert. It's amazing.
Well, she certainly campaigned on her foreign policy experience, so there you go.
She put out a statement that said, when our policymakers fail to call out our enemies or acknowledge the importance of our alliances, the world is less safe. That's why Hudson's work is so critical.
Did she sound like that, Larry? Did she sound exactly like that?
In my ears, that's what she sounds like. They believe the American people should have the facts and policymakers should have the solutions to support a secure, free, and prosperous future.
What voice is that?
I don't know. Anyway, there you go. Nikki Haley is going to be at the Hudson Institute. I wonder if she can have that gig and sit on the boards of major military-industrial complex organizations as well. Wasn't she on the board of Boeing for a while there?
I think so, yeah.
Do you think she's responsible for the doors flying off jumbo jets?
Goodness, you're on fire.
I'm sorry. It's just great. I love it when people get jobs at think tanks because they can really do the Lord's work.
Just sit around in a tank and think.
6:52.
Making sense of your world.
Thank you for your clear insight.
News Talk 105.9 WMAL.
This is a major wake-up call.
Making sense of the news.